not a fireman, but my dad is a career fireman. I've heard plenty of funny, weird or just, kind of things from his work, but one sticks out for the funniest. A neighboring town to my dad's work had a brand new firehouse built, about 6 months before this event. It's a bunch of hungry guys around dinner, so the chef of the day decided to cook some pan sausages. Well, they caught a call and forgot to turn off the stove. They came back to a major grease fire and had to report a fire in their own firehouse. Needless to say, they lost everything and the village wasn't happy. My father was retired, a firefighter in London. He once phoned me just to tell me about a job he had just been to. He told me that he had just been to a fire in a happy fun time dungeon and that the fire had been started when the woman was trying to burn the man's chest hair off with a candle. Then proceed to drop the candle onto the fur rug when hot wax burned her. I laughed and he said, "You'll be sick in a second." He then proceeded to tell me the couple were in their very late 70s. Obligatory, not a firefighter, burnt down my best friend's house as a child after watching Toy Story. Because we thought that if we lit Buzz Lightyear on fire he would fly, and #X200B. He didn't. And an unfortunate series of events followed that culminated with his house completely ruined and his enormous family out of a house for a year. The worst part is that I was the one that lit the fire because my friend didn't know how to use matches, and #X200B. Anyhow, had to go through a lot of psyche evals after that to make sure I wasn't one of the youngest arsonists of all time. It's kind of a legend here amongst the fire department though. Was telling this story at a party around Christmas and a firefighter was at the party and he remembered the whole thing. Lol. Back in 2011 there was a fire in Croatia and I was sent out to stop it with a team this year. The cause of the fire was a cat. The cat turned on a stove. Don't ask me how. In California during the 80s there was a series of fires and a skilled fire investigator was hired to find the culprit. It turned out that he was the arsonist all along. https www.california-son.co/story/a-california-was-regarded-as-sage-but-it-was-him. All along. We were sent to a funeral home for a fire investigation. We arrived and there was light smoke coming from the rear door. The nicely dressed funeral director and his 2 female assistants met us at that door and were all slightly out of breath. They had just started the process of cremating someone, and when they were wheeling the body into the crematorium, the thin particle board the body was on broke. The body was half in and the oven was up to 900 degrees and rising. They cremate people at about 1600. The body is on a conveyor roller system like in factories but with the broken board and the deceased weighing about 350 pounds. They weren't able to get her in before she started to sizzle and smoke. We got our pike poles and lifted and pushed and managed to get the body all the way in so that they could close the door and finish the process. During that time I was watching her head catch fire and the rest of her start to sizzle and char more. I think her head was far enough in that the burning hair smell was vented up and I didn't smell that. I did smell her body sizzling and cooking and it smelled like I was grilling steaks. The fact that she smelled delicious was a really weird thing and stuck with me more than watching her start to burn. We had 2 separate fires in the year that were caused by the sun shining through a window, through an object and causing the magnifying glass effect. One was a glass paperweight sitting on top of a stack of papers. It burned a hole straight through the stack, down to the desk. It was wild. The other one escapes me at the moment. Might have been the sun shining through a glass bottle or something, if memory serves me correctly. Either way, it's relatively bizarre to get a call like that, let alone 2. And both were fairly close to one another. Even more ironic, a friend of mine had this happen in his own home the same year. The sun was shining on a Santa Claus figurine and the fabric robe caught fire. I'm not a firefighter. However, The fire station in my hometown burned down. People started calling the fire station telling them it was on fire. And they didn't believe it until they finally walked outside and looked. They had just enough time to get the fire engines and a few things out before it got too bad. It ended up burning to the ground and they had a new one built. Back when I worked EMS, I ran a medical call with a very difficult patient. The patient refused any care or transport. I did paperwork for a refusal and gave the patient a copy. The patient then, "What the fluff am I supposed to do with this paper?" I said, "Burn it for all I care." 10 minutes later I am back en route to that address for a structure fire. Had a guy try and kill himself by lighting himself on fire in an apt stairwell last week. Unfortunately it turned into a 2-alarm fire that killed a 10-year-old. There was a rash of fires in my area. After years they clued in that it had to be arson. After burning several hundred acres and evacuating a nearby town, the arsonist finally made a mistake. The arson investigators found his ignition device, which involved a cigarette that usually burn up in the blaze. But a single cigarette doesn't prove anything. However, the fire marshal got a gut feeling about it and decided to hit up the nearest gas station CCTV footage an hour prior to the blaze. To his surprise, he saw a local highway patrolman that was also a former fire department chief. The patrolman, who was also deeply religious and didn't smoke, bought a pack of cigarettes and left. The fire marshal contacted Highway Patrol and they examined the GPS coordinates of the patrolman and the time of the fire. And guess where he was? To bring him in quietly, they decided to have someone who he trusted request an interview in front of a camera in the county building where he'd be required to surrender his gun before entering. The trusted man they selected was the fire marshal himself. As they had fought fire together for years, the patrolman surrendered his gun willingly and entered the interview with the fire marshal, who proceeded to show him the evidence they had against him. Monsieur, fortunately, the patrolman confessed to everything and surrendered, and has cooperated with authorities since. Edit. People have been asking for the article associated. I haven't wanted to share it because I don't want to give out too much personal information, but I'll post it here for the next 24 hours and then it's going down. http www.media.biz/news/article_DDC4C3C2-44ad-11EA-818A-F2ed8FCB10A HTML. I can answer this. Recently I had a fire that I investigated. The only fire darnage in the second floor bedroom is in a single joist space in the floor. The carpet, padding, and subfloor were completely consumed, perfectly along the joists on either side. Elsewhere in this room, a laptop battery exploded. There is no opening in the floor to the joist space that burned. The only explanation I have is that there was a gas leak into that joist space, and enough of the ambient gas leaked into the room and the battery failed igniting the gas, which traveled through the HVAC system to the joist space where it actively burned. Problems with this: it is fluffing ridiculous to have two failures occur at essentially the same time. There's no fire darnage in the bedroom, only heat darnage. The gas line that ran through this area was only on one end of the joist space and was a solid steel pipe. There were no joints. There were also no holes I could find. Also, I am hard-pressed to believe that a single cell of a lithium battery has enough energy to ricochet off of a wall and penetrate through carpet, padding, and subfloor. So that's my weirdest cause. Obligatory, not a firefighter. Me brother was 14 and tended to well wander off. He was the survivalist type. Would go hunting, fishing, or camping in the woods and fields by our house quite often. Always alone, and no one thought anything of it. One day he managed to burn down 2 fields and some trees of a nearby wood, even caught before the fire department got out there and got it contained. No one was hurt. All was well in the end because our parents were the only ones to suffer any property damage, as he always stayed on their land. My parents were pissed. They originally thought he had been sneaking off to smoke, and they were ready to rip him a new one. Turns out he was trying to make napalm and was sort of successful. He is now infamous in our small town and has gone on to have a stellar military career. At least until he was injured in Afghanistan. Didn't get into trouble for napalm, but would have for cigarettes. Gotta love small towns. He is now in charge of fireworks every year. Because why the hell not? You're just looking for arson tips. Not a firefighter, but still a good story. In my hometown, some teenagers thought it would be a good idea to make a campfire in the woods. However, the dumb part was when they wanted to try out if they could set a tree on fire with a burning piece of wood. They burned down more than half of the wood and 2 people were lethally wounded. Grain silos will explosively combust sometimes because of the grain dust. I'm not a firefighter, but we have a lot of fires in the city I live in. I think the dumbest one yet was when a guy tried casting his own sword in his house. I repeat, he tried casting a sword in his house. He lived on the most flammable street in the city. There's been a lot of fires on that street. Also, this particular fire was all over the global news. Not a firefighter, but my father was. One day, he got called to a house fire on the outskirts of town. Upon arrival, the whole house was engulfed in flames. However, the owner of the house, an older lady, desperately wanted to run back in and get her belongings. They had to restrain her. After the flames were put out, my father went through the rubble to hopefully find some of her belongings. Right in the middle of the house, he found leftovers of a book, dolls, mason jars of oil, sand. Then it clicked, this lady was doing black magic. The lady's breath smelled like pure gasoline. She was doing an old ritual of spitting flammable liquids onto whatever she was casting a spell on. It's done with oil usually, but I guess this lady didn't have the funds or brains, so she settled with gasoline, which she spat put onto the dolls that what my dad assumes was surrounded by candles. Yep, a lady lit up her house by spitting out gasoline in the name of black magic. BC, why not? Also not a firefighter. When we were kids, we were playing D&D at a friend's house. Our party came upon a bridge with some trolls on it. So I figured the best way to handle it was to have one guy throw oil on the bridge and then my magic user threw a fireball at the atmosphere. Suddenly one guy says, "I smell smoke." We laughed and he said, "No, I'm serious. I smell smoke." We laughed some more until we looked up and saw smoke all over the ceiling. It turned out someone had left a pot of water boiling on the stove. The wind had blown a curtain onto the flame and it caught fire. Fortunately, we were able to throw some water at it and put it out. The kids' parents were also amazingly calm about everything. We did much stupider stuff than that at his house and never got in trouble. And we never heard any more about it. Actual firefighter here. Years ago during my training, a guy parked his work van in a parking lot, threw a chain he had from the cab into the back, and went inside the store. Each end of the chain happened to land on battery posts still hooked up to some machinery inside the van. It sparked and melted the tarp it was on, and shortly the whole van was up in flames. Pretty crazy odds. Obligatory, not a firefighter, and #X200B. A guy and his chemist friend made cesium metal while drunk. It went about as well as you would think drunk chemistry would go. And their whole porch was on fire soon after. They were neighbors of mine. Remember it like it was yesterday. Lesson of the day: don't try to make volatile metals while wasted. Went to a fire where the cause was from a construction staple used to hold wiring in place was accidentally driven through the wire to a smoke detector. The house was nearly finished but no one had moved in, yet thankfully, just seemed ironic to me. My friend and I were walking around and found a lighter. Fast forward 30 minutes later and we were lighting a tampon we found on fire. It burned faster than we thought and we then threw it into a bush. The bush caught on fire, resulting on a small shed catching on fire. Not a firefighter. Sorry, a few months ago a fire started in our house. I have a decorative metal dish on my coffee table with some random stuff in it. Pens, nail polish, coins, etc. I lit the candle on the table, not realizing it was touching the metal dish. I left the candle burning and went upstairs. Said dish got very hot from contact with the candle, which made the nail polish in the dish heat up until the bottle exploded. Cue molten nail polish splattering the table and landing on the Bic lighter I lit the candle with. The lighter is now shooting flaming butane in the air. My brother just happened to come downstairs when this was happening and was able to put out on the ensuing fire. We had a drought record last summer in my country and a huge wildfire came out of nowhere. I had just driven home looking forward to the weekend when I got an automated text from my sergeant. 5 square kilometers field was engulfed in flames and roots were burning up to half a meter under the soil. Took well over a weekend to put out, and force came from the entire country. It was fluffing chaos, and the cause is still unsolved. It's possibly a dumped cigarette butt. Firefighter for 10 years. Guy was refueling a large storage tank from a tanker truck. He was supposed to turn off truck while pumping but he didn't. He overfilled storage tank. Gas fumes got sucked into diesel engine and ignited. Kaboom. Worst fire I ever went to. Thought I was dead for sure when the tanker blew up in front of us. https www.google.com/amp/s/www.stogastine.com/article/2012219967% 3f template equals ampart. Story my brother told me. He responded to a illegal pot grow op fire. Scene investigators went in and one was freaking out big time and the other was laughing his butt off. Some guy managed to kill himself by shooting himself twice in the back of the head, wiping down all of the surfaces in his house, dragging his own dead body around the house into position and setting the place on fire. Typical journalist behavior, I suppose. Probably a bit overworked. A friend of mine told me about a call his dad, firefighter, went on. A man managed to get a bunch of room phone numbers at a hotel. He called everyone on the second floor and told them that there was a bedbug infestation and that they needed to take their mattresses and bedding out into the hallway. He then called a room on the third floor, and a drunk lady answered. He explained to her that there was a gas leak and told her to get rid of all electronics. So she proceeded to defenestrate any and all electronic appliances and devices. Threw her phone out too. She even managed to remove a large TV, which fell from her room to the ground below, cracking the pavement and opening a gas line. This was why the fire department was called in. Fire chief here. A guy left his house with his wife to a party. Came back alone to his house because he forgot something. Picked up several petrol canister from the garage and poured it all over the house. He wanted to scam the insurance because the debt was too high and he cannot pay it anymore. He wanted to burn down the house slowly and returning to his wife to the party. The moment he lit the match, a huge explosion occurred which destroyed all windows immediately and most of the surrounding area. Got some serious burns and the whole street smelled like a petrol station blew up. 2 people inside the house on the upper floor in a different apartment were injured too. So he was sentenced to jail also for attempted murder, because he knew they were inside. Man kept pig fenced in, behind house. Propane tank line was buried about 4 inches underground where pig was. Pig piss and garbage made a brass fitting and propane line brittle. It broke. Leaked propane. It pulled against house. Some went inside. Got ignited by a heater. Burned house. I was a volunteer fireman in our rural town. Some college students were leaving their rented farmhouse at graduation, so they threw a huge party. One of the 3 charcoal grills they had in the living room grilling burgers tipped over and caught the house on fire. We got there and put the fire out, and to our pleasant surprise, there were 2 kegs of beer on ice in the yard. We had a fire on a desktop a few months ago and there wasn't anything plugged into the outlet. The old man who moved there recently had set up his desk and put a magnifying glass in his cup holder in front of the window. The sun came through the window, magnified onto his daily diary, journal, and started the fire. Took us a bit to figure that one out.